assume it's a 3-inch trailing edge and a 4-inch leading edge. And so how do I transition between the two? And at the same time, pull a curve around this wingtip bow. Well, that's where I step up and I use something called bias tape. And bias tape is cut on the 45. It means they literally pull out a sheet of fabric and start cutting it in strips on the 45. And so because of that, about every 7 or 8 foot, you're going to have a sewn seam. So can I leave that sewn seam exposed?
Mm-hmm. You wouldn't want to.
Oh,
I certainly wouldn't want to because it looks horrible. You can also run into some legal issues. That's a sewn seam. What do we know about sewn seams?
Yeah, it's covered.
It's going to have. So now we've got a tape and then a tape over top of the tape, and so it can get kind of messy. And so just to be courteous to the next person that uses this kit,
It's kind of shooting yourself in the foot, isn't it? You put that seam in
it
there.
is.
So is that about the same quality of a seam you'd expect on an envelope?
No, you'll have a different seam altogether on an envelope. On most envelopes, the stitch is in a straight line. This has been zigzagged back and forth so that it will hold in the bias. I like to cut through that seam just so that I know when I pick up that roll of fabric, that roll of tape right there, that I know I've got a full 8 feet. And at the same time, I know just by looking that that's bias, and I don't have to sit there and examine and look at the tape or whatnot. So, I take my pinking shears. See how they're starting to get dull? They're not cutting all the way through.
And that's 3-inch.
This is actually 4-inch right now. This is a 4-inch bias tape.
So what are you going to do? Are you going to pull it to shrink it down?
Watch.
Watch magic.
Am I moving ahead?
The magic. So I can make these two tapes. I can make the union a couple different ways. I can cut the two of them at the same time, and so that will give me a matched cut. Does everybody understand how that works?
Yep.
Overlap.
Yep. So I would overlap them and then come through and stitch them together, and then what that gives me is the pinked edge lines up with itself. Now, generally speaking, that will only work about halfway through the tape. And so if this was a low-wing airplane, we would match up just the top side, and when it rolls around, we kind of just accept whatever happens on the underneath side. Personally, I don't like doing it that way. It's acceptable, it looks good, but for me, you're not going to hide where the joint is, and so what I do is cut a bull nose around the leading edge of both of them,
And overlap them.
and then overlap them. And you can get really artistic and really good, and get something like a Dixie cup, a coffee cup, a Solo cup, a Pringles can, something that's round, that's 4 inches in diameter, and make that round cut.
Nice uniform.
Yeah, then you got that nice radius.
And then match that radius on the other side so that when they overlap, it makes a perfect little circle. That kind of looks pleasing to me. If I have to, I'll make it an oval and I'll extend them just a little bit farther. That's all in artistic operation. Can you hand me that can? Has it got a brush in it?
It does.
So
you're going to want to put it inboard, though, this last rib.
yep. What I'm going to actually do here is wet this out, lay my bias tape in there,
How's yours coming?
wet out my bias tape,
Just one coat. One layer.
and then lay my other tape over top of
Kick
it,
some ass now.
and then wet that out.
I was at the point I was scared to do anything. I can wrinkle. What am I gonna do?
I like to put my bias tapes underneath just because I think it looks a little bit better. But like I said, that's all artist interpretation. So at this point, while I let that dry, I'm going to come through and I'm going to mark the center line of this tape. And you can measure it or you can just eyeball it. That's the difference in Oshkosh and An everyday flyer right there.
The big thing here, though, is where you're going to end up, right?
Yep.
That is the important part.
Yep. That's about enough. All right. Normally I'll let that dry. I'll let that dry so that I can put a little bit of pressure on. What I'm actually going to have happen is one of you guys is going to have to probably hold that just a little bit. Oh, lucky you. There's a rubber gloves over there if you want. And so I'll wet this out. Here's where we're going a little bit different than the other side. I'm going to wet this out both top and bottom.
And you can stretch that narrow as long as it's wet.
Yeah. So, bias tape. Put my center line right on the apex. Come around.
It's gonna
Not step on my tape.
parallelogram.
And then all I have to do is just start putting a little bit of pressure on it.
Man.
Yeah, that stuff's pretty sweet.
Oh.
Why doesn't that work over here?
That was regular, that wasn't bias tape.
Now,
This is bias tape, that's regular tape.
I should probably pay attention, huh?
now
You probably should.
Tape around the whole edge.
That's why you're here.
when you look at this is an inch and a half up, and I'm still on my center line. So notice how a 4-inch tape has now stretched down to 3 inches. And so now I have a perfect transition from 4 to 3. And how do you finish this edge? Once again, artist's interpretation. I like to have a little bit of overlap. There we are.
Is there a 6-inch tape?
Right?
Bias comes in, check me on this,
So when you pull it,
I think it's 3, 4, and 5, I think.
go together. It's like
To stretch down, you ever had one of those things?
And they all lose an inch.
a fence.
So a 5 will stretch to 4,
So if
a
you
4,
had 4 and 4, you could go to this other
a
side.
4 will stretch to 3, and a 3 will stretch to 2.
Well, you could have done the other side with a 5-inch
That's why it lets go.
instead of messing around with all that shrinking.
He was just trying to show us both methods.
Start in the middle and yeah,
It's just different strokes for different folks.
yeah. This is like magic.
So
Yeah.
you could, if theoretically, if you wanted to, then you could use a bias tape around for the whole edge, and then just
The whole wing, well,
the-
you got the
yeah.
seams to deal with,
You got
so.
Oh,
You
that's
got the
right.
seams.
Never mind.
Yeah.
There's
And it's also more
put a
expensive.
hand on that.
Of course it is.
I was just thinking this one over here, you know, you take the wider, maybe, well, it might be a pain to start in the middle, stretch it around the front, and you go 5 to 4, there you go. You don't have to do all the ironing, you've got it pretty much stretched out
Right.
around the back, and I'm just thinking lazy.
There's
I
one
don't like to work.
there's one disadvantage to bias tapes. One disadvantage.
Only one?
They're expensive.
Mhm.
If a normal tape is $10 or $15, a bias tape is going to run you $45.
Yeah, but
Per
it's worth
roll.
its weight in gold.
It
Seriously.
is. It is.
The man hours saved?
For
Yeah,
what,
you
45
just say
yards
45
or-
minutes of ironing.
You wouldn't
Yeah.
want to do a whole wing because you got that seam every 8 feet.
You just want to use it around the edge.
I just, yeah,
I
just
know.
on the
Just
edge.
the edges is all you do, use it.
Yeah.
No.
Oh.
There.
I don't iron.
And then we have a nice transition into the trailing edge. So there's 2 ways of going about this. You get bragging rights over there, where you get speed and convenience over here.
Who needs bragging rights?
This
That's
is-
awesome.
This is what I use. I use bias tapes. If I was, trying to go for that Oshkosh Grand Champion custom built, then maybe I would try a 4-inch tape.
But this might look better without the wrinkles, right?
It,
But this doesn't have
It
the
has the
same
overlaps.
Oh,
size all
yeah.
the way around either like that would.
well, and they're both acceptable. Either one of these styles will win Grand Champion. They're not going to look at this and say, "Oh, well, you could have pulled one tape all the way around." They're not going to look at that. They're looking at the execution of how you did this. Did you make your overlaps nice and clean and the line straight? And your transition from straight to bias, does it look clean? That's what a judge is looking for. For everyday flyers, it's the way to go.
Yeah.
10 minutes and I've got the wingtip done and I'm on to the next project and I'm flying versus 45 minutes an hour just to have a bragging right and then go landscape with the airplane and have to do a repair in 50 hours or whatnot.
That's good.
So
You were building your